The slap rang out like a crack of thunder across the quiet grocery store aisle. Every head turned. The overhead fluorescents buzzed indifferently, casting cold light on the woman pressed against the cereal shelf. Her hand flying to her cheek, eyes filling, a single can of soup still rolling slowly across the linoleum. Her husband stood over her, jaw tight, voice a low hiss, "Don't embarrass me." The store went silent. People froze. A few looked down at their phones. One woman suddenly became very interested in a shelf of pasta sauce. A man near the end of the aisle turned and walked the other direction. You know that thing people do when, they see something uncomfortable and their brain just goes, "Not my problem?" Yeah, that happened to almost everyone there. Almost everyone. His name was Callum Briggs, and he had nothing to spare. Not money, not energy, and certainly not the kind of trouble that came from getting in another man's business in public. He was 34 years old, with rough hands, worn work boots, and a hollow place in his chest where his wife used to be. 2 years earlier, Suzette had walked out on a Tuesday. No note, just her empty side of the closet and a half-eaten box of crackers on the kitchen counter. She left behind their daughter, Wren, age 5 at the time, now a spirited 7-year-old, who still checked the door sometimes when she thought Callum wasn't watching. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner on Maplewood Avenue. The steam from below seeped through the floor on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Wren called it the cloud house. Callum let her believe it was magic. He worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a warehouse loading dock, evenings 3 days a week at a diner where he bussed tables and occasionally washed dishes if Tex called in sick, which was often. He was always tired. He was always a little behind on rent. But every single morning, he braided Wren's hair before school, packed her a lunch with a small folded note inside, a star drawing, a smiley face, some days just the word brave, and walked her to the bus stop even in the rain. He had a dog named Biscuit, a lopsided beagle mix with one ear that stood up and one that flopped. Biscuit slept at the foot of Wren's bed and greeted Callum at the door every night like he'd been gone for years rather than hours. Some nights Callum sat on the kitchen floor after Wren was asleep and let Biscuit press his warm, heavy head into his lap. Those were the moments the hollow place felt just a little smaller. He was not a man who looked for trouble. He was a man who looked for quiet. But at the far end of that aisle he heard the slap, and he saw what most people missed, the woman's eyes. Not flashing with anger, not panicked, just dull, resigned, like a woman who had learned not to react because reacting only made things worse. That was what moved him, not the slap. The acceptance. Callum pushed his cart forward. His heart was hammering. He didn't walk up to the husband and get in his face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to be a hero in the big dramatic sense. He pushed his cart straight to the woman and stopped beside her. "Hey," his voice came out steadier than he felt. "Are you okay?" That was it, just that. The woman, her hand still at her cheeks, looked up, genuinely startled. Not by her husband, by the fact that a stranger had stopped. The husband stepped in immediately. Broad-shouldered, expensive watch. The kind of man who filled a room with his own certainty. "Mind your business. This is private." Callum looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back at the woman. "I heard you," he said, steady and calm. "And I'm asking her." That line, that quiet, unbothered line. The husband had no idea what to do with it. Because Callum hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened anything. He just made it very clear that the husband's volume and the husband's opinion were not the point here. He looked back at the woman. "Do you want to leave? I can walk you out." Her name was Marlowe. She was maybe 40, dark hair, a nice coat, a bruise already blooming faint on her cheekbone. She'd been married to him for 7 years. It hadn't always been like this. It started small. A comment here, a rule there. Little things she explained away, until she didn't have her own money anymore. Didn't have a car. Didn't have friends, because her husband had spent years quietly convincing her that the people who loved her didn't actually care. That last part is important. That's not just cruelty. That's strategy. Abusers isolate on purpose. They cut off every exit so that they become the only option, so that leaving feels like stepping off a cliff with no ground in sight. She had tried to leave twice before. Both times she'd gone back. She had nowhere to go and no way to get there. But right now in this fluorescent-lit grocery store aisle, A tired stranger with worn work boots was looking at her like her answer mattered. Something shifted in her face. Like a window opening. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I do need to leave." She stood up straight when she said it. And that matters. Because this wasn't a woman collapsing. This was a woman who had been ground down for years, suddenly finding the bottom of her feet again. Callum walked beside her to the front of the store. The husband shouted after them. A store employee had already called the police. By the time they reached the exit, security was keeping him back. Outside, the two of them sat on a bench near the entrance. Marlowe stared at the parking lot. Callum didn't ask questions. He stood at a respectful distance, hands in his jacket pockets, just present. Just there. She started talking, slowly at first, then all at once, the way people do when they've been carrying something too long alone. Callum listened to all of it without interrupting. Without jumping in with advice every 30 seconds, he just let her talk. Then he asked if there was anyone she could call. She hesitated. Said her sister Veda lived 40 minutes away, but they hadn't talked in almost a year. Her husband had convinced her that Veda didn't really want her around anymore. Callum held out his phone. "Call her." Marlowe stared at it. She called. Veda picked up on the second ring. The moment she heard Marlowe's voice, she started crying. Said she'd been waiting. Said she'd been scared for a whole year. Said, "Tell me where you are. I'm already getting my keys." The police came. Took statements. The husband was arrested. And as Marlowe would find out later, it wasn't his first complaint. A neighbor had filed one before that had never gone anywhere. When Veda pulled up and Marlowe stood to leave, she turned back to Callum. "There's no card you can buy for a moment like that. No words that really fit," she said. "Why did you help me?" "You didn't have to." Callum shrugged. "My daughter watches me all the time, even when she's not there. I figure I ought to be someone worth watching." Marlowe pressed her lips together. Nodded once. Her sister guided her into the car. "Now, here's something worth knowing. Because this story isn't just a feel-good moment. There's actual science behind why almost no one else helped that day. Psychologists call it the bystander effect. The more people who witness something, the less likely any one of them is to act. Because everyone assumes someone else will do it. Studies show that when just one person breaks from the crowd and steps in, it dramatically changes what happens next for the victim. Just one person. That's the whole math. Callum wasn't special. He was a tired man with 2 jobs and a daughter and a lot of reasons to keep walking. He just decided that seeing something meant doing something. What Callum didn't know was that Marlowe's older sister, Veda, had a close friend, Sable Graves, one who had built a mid-sized architecture and design firm from the ground up over 18 years. Sable had heard the whole story, and she had been looking for a reliable warehouse operations supervisor for the new distribution arm of her business for 3 months. She found Callum through a modest paper trail, the grocery store. Manager remembered his face. She showed up at the diner on a Wednesday evening while he was bussing table 9. "Callum Briggs." He turned. A woman in her mid-50s, silver-streaked hair, calm gray eyes, the quiet authority of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove herself. "That's me. I'm Sable Graves. I believe you helped someone I care about." He set down the tray. "I just asked if she was okay." "No." She shook her head gently. "You stayed. There's a difference." She asked if she could sit. He gestured to the booth by the window, the one with the wobbly leg, and they talked for an hour. She asked him about his work history, about logistics and inventory and managing small crews. He answered honestly, including the gaps, including the 2 jobs in Wren and the reason he hadn't gone back to school yet. She listened the way people listen when they're deciding something important. Before she left, she slid a business card across the table. "Come in Friday, 9 o'clock. I have something I'd like to show you." He almost didn't go. His mother told him to go. Biscuit tilted his lopsided head at Callum on Thursday night in a way that seemed to say, obviously, go. Wren informed only that, "A nice lady wants to talk to Dad about a job," said with complete 7-year-old authority. "You should wear the blue shirt. Blue is trustworthy." He wore the blue shirt. The office was warm and organized, full of light and the smell of coffee and something faintly like cedar. Sable gave him a tour and introduced him to her staff with the same tone she used for everyone. No hierarchy in her voice. He noticed that. They had lunch after, sandwiches at a small table in her office. She told him about her husband Garrett, who had died 4 years ago, a heart attack, sudden and ordinary and devastating, about the loneliness of succeeding at everything and having no one to come home to. She said it plainly, without drama. The way you say things when you've made peace with them, but not completely. I keep plants, she said, almost smiling. 17 of them. My staff thinks it's eccentric. I have a dog with one floppy ear, Callum offered. She laughed, a real one, sudden and bright. He started the job 6 weeks later. The pay was more than both his previous jobs combined. The hours were humane. There was health insurance, and for the first time in 2 years, Callum sat in his car and cried a little at the prospect of taking Wren to the dentist without panic. Sable and Callum fell into an easy rhythm. Daily check-ins, shared frustrations over suppliers, Friday afternoon coffees that gradually stretched from 10 minutes to an hour. She came to Wren's school play in November because Callum mentioned it, and she said, quietly, I'd like that, if it's all right. Wren played a pilgrim and forgot one line and recovered magnificently, and Sable clapped longer than anyone. Biscuit approved of Sable immediately. Biscuit had good judgment. There were hard days, too. Callum made a logistics error in January that cost them a contract. He came to Sable ready to fall on his sword. She heard him out, asked 3 precise questions, identified the system failure that had enabled the mistake, and said, we fixed the system. We don't bury people for systemic problems. He stared at her. She handed him his coffee. Now let's fix it. He had never worked for anyone who said we like that and meant it. By spring, the hollow place in his chest had changed shape. It was still there. It would always be there in some form. But it felt less like absence and more like room. Room that was slowly, carefully being filled. It was a Sunday in April. At the small community park near Maplewood Avenue, Biscuit on his leash, Wren running ahead, Sable walking beside Callum with her hands in her coat pockets. When he stopped walking, I need to tell you something, he said. She turned to look at him. The afternoon light was soft and pale gold. I don't have a lot to offer, he said. I have a kid who borrows your good pens and a dog who sheds on everything and an apartment above a dry cleaner that I am very slowly, no longer, afraid of losing. He paused. But I think I've been falling in love with you for months, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not. Sable looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were bright. Callum, she said. You walked toward my sisters. Friend, when everyone else looked away, she stepped forward. You have been offering things since the day I met you. You just haven't noticed. She took his hand. Wren, 20 feet ahead, turned around to find them not following. She looked at their joined hands. She looked at Biscuit. Biscuit's tail was wagging. Finally, Wren said with enormous satisfaction and turned back to the ducks. They married the following October, small, warm, full of laughter. Wren was the flower girl and took the role with grave seriousness, scattering petals with deliberate precision. Biscuit wore a bow tie and was deeply suspicious of it. Sable filled their new home with 17 plants and then 20, then 24. Callum fixed the dripping faucet, the sticking door, the wobbly step, because he was a man who fixed things, and now he had somewhere permanent to do it. And Marlo? She went to stay with Veda. She connected with a domestic violence advocate. Within a few months, she had her own apartment, her own income. 3 friendships she'd let go of slowly rebuilt, one careful conversation at a time. She went to therapy. She did the hard, unglamorous work of figuring out who she was before all of it. Here's a number most people don't know. On average, a person in an abusive relationship will leave and go back 7 times before leaving for good. 7. Not because they're weak, because abuse rewires how you see yourself. It makes you doubt your own memory, your own judgment, your own worth. Real healing isn't fast or cinematic, but it's real. She and Callum stayed in touch, not as a love story, as something just as valuable. As 2 people who met inside a terrible moment and came out the other side as friends. Wren still talks about her like she's part of the family. Some nights Callum thought about that grocery store aisle, about the can of soup rolling across the floor, about how easy it would have been to look away, about all the people who did. He was glad he hadn't. Here's what this whole story comes down to. Kindness isn't loud. It isn't a grand speech or a dramatic moment. It's what you do in the fluorescent lit, ordinary, inconvenient moments. When stepping in costs you something and no one is keeping score, one person deciding to stay. One question. One phone held out. That's it. That's the whole thing. And you never know how far it reaches. If you or someone you know needs help, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 800-799-7233. You are not alone. The next video is already on your screen. You're going to want to watch it.